Welcome to the Alps, the greatest mountain range in Europe. Known the world over as a top-class tourist attraction for its majestic peaks, incredible range of mountain sports, enchanting alpine villages, and its serene and mirror-clear lakes. I'm continuing my journey across the mountains, meeting some of the remarkable people who live and work here. Alpine people speak a range of different languages and have different traditions and faiths, but they've got lots in common. And what's something that all Alpiners share a taste for? Some of the finest cheeses in Europe. Ask any Alpiner what the best cheese is, and you'll get a smorgasbord of answers, probably depending on local tastes. Cheese is very important for the people of the Alps. Most of us know raclette, the melty one that's used in fondues, reblochon, the tartiflette cheese made of raw milk, Emmentaler, the hard, nutty, holy cheese, and Gruyere, both from Switzerland, as well as the delicious Austrian cheeses Glunder and Trautaler, which I was brought up on. They are all produced with milk from Alpine herds, fed on the lushest of grasses, dotted with medicinal herbs and mountain flowers. I've been to the beautiful pastures of Slovenia to try a very tasty cheese with a great history behind it. Cheese made from mountain pasture milk is popular in all Alpine countries. Some produced in industrial dairies, others handmade directly on the mountain. In the old times, dairymen used mostly sour milk for their cheese, a tradition that today has almost disappeared. Almost. In Slovenia, young shepherd Jan Potočnik takes us to the mountain where sour cheese makes girls fall in love.
It's quite funny legend. It says that this cheese is in the shape of a woman's breast, and in the past the shepherds give two of them to engage the girl.
The tradition of this Trnič cheese has survived with the knowledge of 95-year-old Reska Mali, who still lives in a shepherd hut.
Trnič je naredila, me je ena gospa naučila, ki jih je edino ona znala, pa tela pisava in izrazvala tudi.
For this our cheese Trnič, we must leave the milk few days that it becomes sour, and then we have sour milk. And from sour milk we make cottage cheese, and then we make these shapes, and then leave for 1 or 2 weeks to dry, and then the water goes out and it's dry cheese like parmesan.
Pa še tle ima vzem zraven, a pa na nov. Pa poderaš ga lahko.
In the future, Jan Potočnik wants to turn some of these old huts into guest accommodation. As many Alpine traditions, like the Trnič cheese, struggle to survive, it is the authentic combination with tourism that can continue to keep them alive. The Alps have always been a great natural barrier in the center of Europe. For centuries, they stopped people traveling easily between the German north and Latin south. The Romans won a few victories against the hardy mountain tribes. Hannibal of Carthage was able to cross the Alps with the help of an elephant army. The Vandals and Visigoths found ways to pass through the mountains in summer. But even so, the people who've made the Alps their home have been largely isolated for much of history. Of course, now we have incredible tunnels, feats of modern engineering. Roads, trains, gondolas and ski lifts crisscross the mountains, but there are still a few special places which are difficult to reach. Marco Colombo's been finding out about a town called Monte Viasco, high up in the Alps in Italy, between the glittering lakes of Lugano and Maggiore.
Tired of the rat race? Fancying getting away from it all? Imagine making your home in a place that has no cars, no industry and no pollution. A village built for hundreds but populated only by 6. This is Monte Viasco, nestled on the slopes of the Alpine foothills of Lombardy. The buildings date back to the 16th and 17th centuries. Small stone dwellings with wooden balconies, flagstone roofs on narrow cobble alleys. The only way to reach the village is by a steep mule track. 1,442 steps, an hour's walk from the rest of the world. One of a handful of full-time residents here is 75-year-old Lucia Cassina.
Sono nata qui, ho fatto la mia infanzia e la mia
I was born here and spent my childhood here. I knew how to climb all the beech and cherry trees, and took a few tumbles from them as well, of course. I used to go through all the hedges and rocks, looking for partridge nests. I found fountains in the valleys and brought up water in a bucket. We used to dive into the huge, deep pools in the mountain valleys. They were full of green, icy water. We'd jump in. Looking back, I don't know how it didn't kill us. I think it was the best time of my life.
Lucia has no intention of leaving the village in old age. She doesn't feel cut off from the rest of the world.
Per noi era la normalità.
For us, not having a road to the village has always been normal. We can see all the other village on the other side of the mountain. And although they have a few cars and a road, they used to live the same ways as we did. In the old days, the sacrifices we made were enormous and sometimes terrible, but there were no alternatives. In the past, we'd go down on foot to Korea. We used to buy everything there and come back up to Monteviasco. My mother, who was born at the beginning of the 20th century, used to look back at the time and say how happy we were. We loaded ourselves up like donkeys, but we always sang as we walked up all those steps.
Writer and local historian Maurizio Miozzi says it was never economically viable to build a road up to Monteviasco, so villagers start leaving.
Perché dico questo? Perché prima degli anni 50,
Before the 1950s, there were almost 400 people in Monteviasco. The young people have left, choosing to live in neighboring towns because they have all the services, like schools, pharmacies and shops. The people who have chosen to stay here are rooted culturally and have a particular affection for the place.
But in the late 80s, a cable car was built, linking Monteviasco to Corellia. It brought tourists and gave villagers access to the village below in a few minutes instead of an hour's walk. Some newcomers arrived, starting small businesses such as hostels and restaurants. Roberto, who left the village as a young man, returned 30 years later to set up a restaurant with his partner.
La gente viene a piedi anche solo per mangiare.
People walk uphill for 50, 60 minutes just to come and eat here. This is not fast food. They come here because they want to sit down and feel like family. Customers come in saying good morning, they leave saying ciao ciao, as if we've known each other all our lives, because here it's family.
For the old inhabitants of the village, Monteviasco is a symbol of a past life, without all the conveniences of the modern world. Long-term resident Lucia Cassina knows it's a very special place.
Guardi, questo è stato realmente un
This was truly an island of happiness, a dreamland. The first tourists, if we can call them that, bought houses from the 60s onwards. There weren't many complete outsiders. About 70% of those who bought family houses already had connection to the place. Those that stayed not only bought their homes, but also the package of the whole place. They fitted in because they were a special kind of people. They were interested in really becoming part of the community and didn't want the village to die. When we are together, we eat a lot of good food, sing a lot of songs, look after the village, and have even put on cultural events like painting and concerts.
But in 2018, a tragic event happened that made them more cut off from the outside world than they'd been for decades. The operator of a cable car was crushed to death while servicing it. Since then, the service has been suspended. More recently, In August this year, a landslide destroyed the road to Coriglia, isolating the valley during the pandemic. Currently, the Italian Gendarmerie, the Carabinieri, are in charge of bringing essential goods up to the villagers. Capitan Alessandro Volpini says his officers made the journey up the mule track steps 2 or 3 times a week, carrying rucksacks full of essential goods.
I carabinieri per Monteviasco sono presenti da...
We bring groceries or whatever is requested by the people who have decided to stay living in the beautiful village of Monteviasco. They are keeping it alive. It's become even more complicated recently because Coriglia itself is isolated as a result of the August landslide.
Long-time villagers like Lucia Cassina enjoy joking with the officers and making them feel at home in the village. She has accepted the weekend's residence, knowing that life full-time here wouldn't suit those who need jobs, schools or out-of-town supermarkets.
Vivere come ho vissuto io o la mia mamma.
Living as me or my mother did here is no longer possible. It's unthinkable because times have changed and life is different. For many, it's just not viable to spend half a day getting to Coriglia by the mule truck steps, buying bread and coming back home. To live here, you have to truly love the place. Making your life here depends on how you feel, what you want, and what you have inside. You can read and write, sing to your heart's content. In fact, sing completely out of tune if you want to. Nobody will say a word about it.
Thanks, Marco. What a remarkable place and some really exceptional people. I'd love to visit Monteviasco when I'm next in the area. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Alps were seen as a place of brigands and bandits, difficult to control and easy to hide out in if you could survive the harsh winters. But there have been people living in the mountains for at least 5,000 years. In 1991, the mummified remains of a man was discovered in melting ice on the Austrian-Italian border. He dated back to over 3,000 years before Christ and was given the name Ötzi, after the Ötztal Alps, where his body was discovered. It's thought the climate in the region when Ötzi lived may have been warmer than it is now, making habitation in the Alps more manageable. As temperatures rise, ice melts and the frozen soil underneath, the permafrost, begins thawing too. Soils which have been frozen for thousands of years are warming up, and that means ancient viruses and bacteria are coming back to life too. During a heat wave in a remote part of Siberia in 2016, a 12-year-old boy died, and at least 20 other people were hospitalized after becoming infected with anthrax. The theory goes that they contracted it from the thawing carcass of a reindeer, which died over 75 years before. More than 2,000 reindeer grazing nearby became infected as the disease, which affects the skin and lungs, spread into the water and soil. It was a wake-up call for what could happen if dormant microbes are released into the environment. But this recent phenomenon may also present some opportunities. A group of scientists in the Alps are studying some of the newly exposed soils in their region, with a view to uncovering something helpful in the ancient bacteria they find there. I am joining Beat Frey and his Swiss research team, who are extracting permafrost samples on the 3,000-meter high Schafberg mountain.
So my name is Beat Frey. I'm 59 years old. I'm leading a research group, microbial ecology, studying microbes in the environment. So we see here the Morteratsch Glacier, so one of the most famous and most documented glacier in Switzerland. We know from the glacial monitoring that all the glaciers are retreating very fast in the last 10-20 years due to climate warming. So maybe 10-15 years ago, the thinking was that glacial ice is sterile, so there are no living organisms in ice. But more and more we are aware through studies that glacial ice are having microbes, fungi, bacteria, potentially viruses. So we found a huge diversity in permafrost, let's say 2,000, 3,000 different. Many of them are unknown. Virus we haven't studied yet. And now the question is, what is living in the permafrost? Are they dead, dormant? Because the permafrost here is 15,000 years old. The main question was, are all these microbes, are they just sleeping? Are they dormant? Are they dead? We don't know. We discovered that they are not active living in the permafrost. They, with all this very extreme environment, no sunlight, no energy, no nutrients, no liquid water. So they are living there. So they have special pathways that they can survive there. So we are talking about a treasure, an unknown treasure, which have to be explored. Since we don't know the taxa the species are living, so we never know what really could get out of the permafrost. Therefore, I think it's needed that we know better what is living in the permafrost, that we can also predict in future through the climate warming, we can predict if there's some potentially some danger or not. So therefore, I think it's a need that we somehow explore this treasure of microbes, of unknown species.
The people of the Alps today are also a resilient bunch. They love nothing more than a challenge. It's not unusual to meet walking groups, trail runners and climbers well into their 60s and 70s, enjoying the fresh mountain air. We met Tomo Sarf, somebody who's not letting the grass grow under his feet, a super fit, energetic mountain runner.
Hi, my name is Tomo and I'm coming from Slovenia. You don't know where is Slovenia? Wow! It's a small country on the eastern side of the Alps range, where the best road cyclists are coming from. Like most of Slovenians, I love nature. I love mountains, especially our mountains. Not because they are more beautiful than the others, but simply because they are so close. Whenever I can escape from my daily commitments, I try to go to the mountains. Any kinds of biking and any kinds of running or walking in the mountains are my passion. In fact, I have been doing this for more than 40 years. Okay, racing when I was younger, but enjoying now when I'm in the 60s. You know, when you cross the 50s barrier and later, when you enter the 60s, you become aware it's not necessary to go to the mountains with the latest model of the gadget with hundreds of functionalities. In any case, you are able to use just few of them. I'm not a big fan of early mornings or late evenings. It's not natural to wake up before the sunrise and to go to bed in the middle of the night. But when you go to the mountains, unnatural becomes natural. For your safety and to enjoy the sunset or sunrise. There's nothing more beautiful in the mountains than the sunrise and the sunset. That's what I'm gonna do tomorrow. Escape. Something for my soul, something for my body. Listening to the silence of the nature. Listening birds singing. I simply love it. And I can't think about my life without our beautiful Alps. Okay, let's do it.
I'd love to join Tomo on one of his runs, if I could keep up. People love to visit the Alps, both in summer and winter. According to the World Wildlife Fund, the mountains are visited by around 120 million tourists a year. The French Alps draw people from all over the world to enjoy the spectacular setting and outdoor activities. Even with the drop-off in numbers caused by the pandemic, it was still a busy summer on the Alps, with mostly European tourists rather than visitors from the US or Asia. Ross Cullen has been looking at the effects tourism has on the mountains.
The French Alps are a pristine mountain environment, but one that locals fear is being ruined, and there is a growing resistance to the growing numbers of tourists. The White Brigade Mountain Patrol monitor all the climbers, checking they have the right equipment and are booked in at the different shelter refuges further up the peak.
It's still dirty at the refuge, around the refuge. People doesn't care about the environment, and we are in 2020. Please, please, help us to keep this place clean. It's a legacy for our children.
Up to 30,000 people attempt to summit Mont Blanc every year, and they leave behind both plastic and organic waste. Jean-Marc Payex is the mayor of Saint-Gervais, the town where many people start their ascent of the mountain.
Si vous jetez une boîte de sardines.
If you drop a sardine tin or a Coke can, some people will say it's not a big deal because you can't really see it. But the mountain is being contaminated. Our natural water supply is being polluted. People are used to others picking up after them, but in the mountains there's no trash collection or sewage system. They don't have a mindset in harmony with our natural environment.
Montagne polluée.
Tourism powers Chamonix and the surrounding area, but littering, path erosion and overuse of water and energy is wearing down locals' appetite for mass tourism.
The issue that the tourism industry faces in these mountains is that they need the flow of visitors to sustain the sector, but more people bring more problems and increased pressures on the environment.
The cable cars in the Chamonix Valley ferry visitors up the mountainsides to hike and trail run or get an eagle-eye view out paragliding.
And there's so much on offer, I mean, just look around.
Ollie Alkemer works for a mountain guiding company. He says there needs to be change towards more sustainable tourism within the industry.
Let's look at how we power the valley, solar power, etc. And then the transport itself. Let's have a public transport that everyone can use and everyone can rely on so they don't have to drive. It will take now a huge effort from all the companies and all the residents to really step up and protect the environment that we call our playground.
The Alpine residents are protective of this land, hoping that tourists' lasting effects here are only positive, leaving behind just their footsteps and not a more detrimental legacy.
I think one of the things I've learned from my journey in the Alps is that we all need to change our behavior to make sure the mountains can continue to be enjoyed by generations in the future. Now, what brings people together in the cold winter months when even the most intrepid can't go out and run up the mountains? A colorful winter festival, of course. If you think Halloween is scary, well, wait till you meet the Alpine Krampus.
The real horror started when he grabbed me and he tossed me around. So I was hanging with my hat down and he was holding me for the legs. And I think this was the moment when I got really scared because I thought, okay, my cousin would never do such a thing to me.
Suddenly you hear these bells. Ding, 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 ding. You get a little afraid and then you start to run. And you never see them, but you hear the bells. It's frightening, but it's fun.
I can tell you, those young women were literally shaking when they told me about their childhood memories of Krampus. I can remember how terrified I was as a child too, when I heard the ring of the cowbell, the crack of the whip, and a group of men dressed up in terrifying masks come running down the streets, causing mayhem as they made their way through the town. The name Krampus comes from the German word Krampen for claw. He's the half-goat, half-demon companion of St Niklaus, who punishes naughty children 2 weeks before Christmas. Krampus night is usually celebrated on the 5th of December, the evening before St Nicholas Day on the 6th. The wicked hairy devil appears in the streets, sometimes accompanying St. Nicholas and joined by scary Berchten elves. Berchten is an ancient pagan festival, so some think the origins may go even further back to before Christianity. Krampus appears in slightly different guises all over Central Europe as a sort of anti-Santa, and the festival has been gaining traction in recent decades. In Slovenia, evil spirits called barkelji clang chains and frighten little children, threatening to hurt them if they don't behave well. Where I grew up in Carinthia in Austria, it meant groups of men dressed up in highly decorated wooden masks, making as much mischief as possible. So what's it all about? Social anthropologist Matthäus Rest has written a book about Krampus and told us more about this Alpine tradition.
The Krampus generally roam the streets of many places in the Alps, in rural Austria, southern Germany, and also places in northern Italy and Slovenia, and also increasingly in eastern Switzerland. So it is definitely a custom that is strongly increased in intensity and size over the last, let's say, generation. In the region of Salzburg, that I know the best, in many places where we have like a long tradition of the Krampus that goes back more than, let's say, a generation or two.
So it's got more popular in the last few decades. But where does Krampus come from?
The origins of Krampus are shrouded in mystery. It's hard to say where it actually originates. There is, of course, a long tradition of wooden masks in Europe and outside of Europe. But when we look at the actual historical sources in the Alpine region, the first written mentioning of something that might resemble the Krampus comes from the late 1500s. So in 1580, we find the first written source, a small town in southern Bavaria. And from that point onwards, throughout the 17th century, it seems to be spreading in that wider region between Tyrol and Bavaria and Salzburg.
You grew up in the Alps. What are your earliest memories of Krampus?
I grew up in a valley called Gastein Valley, which is right at the border between Salzburg and Carinthia in the middle of the Alps, where the Krampus is a very important festival for some people, kind of really identity defining. And I grew up in a farming family in a house right next to the church, so kind of in a very central location. And I vividly remember when I was a small boy, my uncle at that point was an active Krampus, and his troop of Krampus, these troops are normally groups of 6 to maybe 10 or 12 young men. I very closely remember this transformation that was going on, that they would come in the afternoon and then walk into the living room as humans, basically, and come out of it as Krampus. And my parents kept telling me that I was always very curious about it and kind of interested. But as soon as they had transformed, as soon as they had taken on the Krampus form, as soon as they were wearing the masks, I was extremely frightened of them as a very small boy.
Nowadays, the festival's becoming a pretty big deal and has even made it over to the USA. There's even a horror movie, but probably the most fun you're going to get, if you like scaring little children, is if you get to dress up as a Krampus yourself. I met Robert Ronacher and Frank Kaschall at a convention for Krampusnacht groups in Carinthia. Big scary wooden masks, a furry costume and a whip, and most importantly a big cowbell that makes a lot of noise. The tradition of Krampus is very popular in Austria and other parts of the Alps. Today, on a warm sunny day, I am in the village of Tröbolach to meet dozens of these groups to talk about this tradition.
The best part I like in this tradition is, I would say, my mask. I would really say my mask. My mask is almost 30 years old, almost 70 kilos, but it's the only one of the kind. The noise you're making, you're really loud, you're really big, and you are heavy and you're wide. We have work to do, we have stuff to do, and one weekend to have fun, one day to have fun, and the tradition is only that kind. The winter, the minus temperature is only coming because bad ghosts.
You only have a bad year if you don't chase the bad ghosts. You have bad harvest, bad weather. The farmers said that you have to chase your bad ghosts, or the bad ghosts who appears at this time.
And what is happening in the winter months to chase the ghosts? What are you guys doing?
So we are just focusing on trying to be as loudy as possible. We are making big noise like in our city in Rantain. So our group especially we are making our Lauf every year on the 5th of December. It's the Krampus day, it's our tradition. We are making it on 5th of December.
I remember when I was a young boy, we used to know that if we sing this song next to the Krampus, Krampale Meme, Hosen voller Schnee.
Yes.
So it means it's like mocking the Krampus, making fun of the Krampus. But
yes.
We knew if we do that, they are allowed to hit us.
Yes. If you're mocking the Krampus, the Krampus would directly chase you and whip you. Yes, of course, because you don't respect the tradition.
Krampus, not for the faint-hearted. Please make sure you respect the tradition if you're planning a trip to the Alps at the beginning of December and don't want to be whipped by a terrifying goat devil. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this journey through the Alps with me, my colleagues, and some of the wonderful people who make this special place their home. It's no surprise that this mountain range in the heart of Europe is one of the most visited destinations in the world, a place to enjoy and protect for future generations. You can be sure you'll receive a warm welcome even in the coldest of months, just so long as you don't bump into a Krampus. Don't forget, you can see pictures and videos of some of the fantastic Krampus masks and outfits on our web pages, as well as getting a bird's eye view of the historic town of Monteviasco. The Alps timeless and changing at cgtn.com/Europe.